Okay, doke. Well, on this episode, we have Craig Sullivan, who, if you're not following him on LinkedIn or anything he's doing, you're living under a rock and you're following the wrong people. Craig Sullivan, you've been absolutely pioneer in terms of experimentation, specifically, I think, around strategy and culture, because it's so important to be talking to leaders and talking to leadership about getting that buy-in. So I'm super happy that gracefully accepted the invite to join the show. Craig, maybe if you give a 30 seconds. Why should I talk to you? Why should I trust you? Who even are you for people who don't know who you are?
Well, I've been doing A/B testing, largely making lots of mistakes, particularly early on with A/B testing since 2004. I think there's probably 60 or 70 odd stupid things I've done with A/B tests. So I've failed lots at it, and also been in both client side situations where I've been kind of like a lone wolf, or part of a very siloized team, to a situation now where I'm working with organizations on kind of, organization-wide restructuring and change programs, right, to support experimentation. So I've had both internal and external perspectives on what's working right and what's working wrong.
Yep.
And these days I'm doing a lot of audits with experimentation to try and kind of get under the skin of, hey, we've invested all this money and we've structured all these teams and we've given them all these experimentation tools. Why is it not working? Right? That's usually the question. Why is it not? This thing is supposed to do all these amazing things. It's not working. Help, my car won't start. It's kind of like that, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then you've got to figure out what's wrong, right? And get under the skin of the problem.
Yep.
But why is that situation there? And I think it's partly because, a bit of support would be helpful. Lots of leaders don't seem to care about experimentation, or they feel it's a tactical thing. We have a team that tests buttons, or our our marketing department has a silo that does CRO, right?
Yep.
That's the
Yep.
kind of thinking. It's stuff that we don't do as leaders. It's somebody lower down that does, right? So either it's passed off because it's not understood, or it's like, oh, it's really all gnarly and technical. I'll give that to Bob, who runs that team, and then Bob will go, oh, it's a bit all gnarly and technical. I'll give that to Jamie, right?
Yep.
And it'll
Yep.
get passed down the organization, right? So
Yep.
it settles at the natural level where someone is prepared to have the cojones to stand up and bloody own it, right? Okay,
Yep.
right. So
Yep.
if you're at board level, you're prepared to own experimentation and everything that goes with that, your future will be rosy, right? If you are somebody who wants to keep passing it off down the chain, so it becomes a tactical thing within your organization, your future may not be quite as rosy. So in order to get the support, right, it needs to be accountable and owned higher up in the organization, right?
Mhm.
And a couple of us talked recently about this concept of a thing called the ceiling, right? Which is a cross between a silo and a glass ceiling, right? And we discovered in audits of organizations that there's a level at which nobody takes cares about experimentation or owns it or even talks about it very much. And that's the level at where the ownership has dropped to within the structure, right?
Mhm.
However far it's passed down, that's where the glass ceiling lies, right? And it becomes siloized then because it's part of somebody else's team structure,
Mhm.
right? It's not
Mhm.
part of something that sits outside of product and marketing. So it becomes thought of as an omni-channel business-wide test anywhere thing. No, that's a marketing thing because we passed it down into the marketing team, right? So really, water finds its own level. Experimentation, accountability will also find its own level, right?
Yep.
Um, so grow some, take ownership, lead experimentation, and learn what it's like to fail and invent.
Yep. I think one of the things that resonates with me about you saying that is no one taking ownership about experimentation. And one of the things that I've seen from doing audits on our side as well is like experimentation is one job of the PM's suite of jobs, and they're able to dedicate like 20% to experimentation, but also they don't understand how to do it. And then also they have a bunch of other tickets they have to prioritize. So like guaranteed work versus experiment. No, we're going to go for the guaranteed work because of X, Y, and Z reason.
Yeah.
Which inherently is kind of the wrong way to approach it, in my opinion. Like, but to your point,
You have to make it, what do they call it? Bread and butter, day to day, turnkey, right? Seamless, friction free, right? That's the whole point about it. And Lucas Vermeer talks about a lot about this, the flywheel. There's a bit of repeatable part of any experimentation work that you will do again, right? And if you optimize that part, right, then you will massively reduce the amount, right? Because you're going to do it many, many times, right? So not only do you get it right, but you make it faster each time you go round it, right? You could continual optimization of that flywheel, and that generates massive growth in experimentation in itself, you know?
Yeah. It's the same thing like going to the gym, right? Like you're not going to be able to squat 500 pounds, but you got to start somewhere. You got to start, keep it going, make it repeatable, like keep on doing it.
So it's a reproducible and completely automated process. Those companies that are automating stuff, you know, are able to scale their experimentations programs more effectively. You know, the number of times I've seen people wondering why they can't grow, who tell me that they're doing manual analysis for all of their tests, right? And the analyst has to take them. No, the world should not be like that. That's not what people who are running thousands or tens of thousands of experiments every year are doing. They're not going, hey, let's hire like 5,000 analysts, right? So we can do more experiments. No, they're figuring out, how can we automate this, right? So that the poor analysts can actually do some analysis rather than this boring piece of work that you've given them. Analysts hate doing this kind of stuff. Machines are great at it, right?
Yeah, agreed.
And there's no analysis involved, really. Not very much anyway.
Yeah. Especially, I think, to your point, like standardizing those inputs and outputs will make it so that it's like process and governance. You have to establish a process and keep it standardized, because the worst thing you could do is have, like, let's say you have experimentation evangelized for your organization. If you have experimentation run one way with one like function and then run another way, then you guys are unified towards doing it properly. Have you seen that where a lot of companies will like, they might be higher in terms of experimentation?
One of the jobs of the of leadership here is to pick, set up, design the right organizational structure to set experimentation free, right? But in doing that, there also comes a need to work out how to distribute knowledge effectively across the organization about experimentation, right? So you create all these decentralized, autonomous product teams, right, who are able to run experimentation. Well, there's two aspects to the standardization. You've not only got to standardize the tooling that all of those teams use, right? So you've got to give them turnkey stuff that they can use to build experiments, right? So you're building an internal product here that is being provided to an internal customer, which is teams who want to run experiments, right? And they will need that tooling. And the second thing is education, right? Because everybody who's tried all the various organizational models has come to the conclusion eventually, after a certain level of maturity, that people who work in the product teams have highly specific product domain knowledge, often acquired over years of experience once you count it up in the team, right? And some of these teams, you know, cost like $1 million or $1.5 million to run a year. You're putting a lot of time into it. You also need to put the effort into the education, right? And there's one approach, which is you tell your teams, hey guys, you're all doing it differently and you're all doing it wrong, right? And you do it by diktat and say, you'll do it this way. That will not work. You can try it, but I can guarantee you it's not going to work, right? because it's not a supportive, enmeshed, collaborative environment, right? So there's a model where you have Booking calls them ambassadors, but these are people who are already in the product teams, who have that domain knowledge about that product area, who also are interested in experimentation, and you focus education through them. And they then become the first line of support within that team. They want to run an experiment, they go to that ambassador within their team. And now what we're doing is we're getting the ambassadors who are really experienced to help the ambassadors who are not so experienced get up to the same level as them, right? So it's like a rising tide floats all boats approach to educating people in a way that brings everybody's knowledge up, rather than saying, you're getting it wrong, do it this way, right? You actually all say to, let's all together figure out the best way that we can do this, like together as a group, right? And then it's less about, you're not then being critical of the work of other teams. What you're doing is you're helping them make their work better. So you say, oh yeah, you're running one of those. We ran one of those like 3 months ago, and here's what we found out. You might want to change this thing. And you go, oh yeah, that's really important. Thanks so much for that, right? So now all of the ambassadors are actually working with the center of excellence, right, or whatever you call it, or experiment hub, the place where all this stuff is measured and governed. But then that education is also distributed out to all the product teams as well. Everybody gets good at experimentation this way.
Yeah. I love that, because it's not necessarily ideal to expect everyone to know exactly how to do everything about experimentation, but
or to be in the same levels. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So having those brand ambassadors, I think, is such a fantastic way to accomplish that. But I'll push back a little bit, or not even push back. Let me come at this from another perspective. And like Booking.com is absolutely just the high watermark when it comes to experimentation, right? Like there's a lot of companies where I think leadership wrongfully assumes that I'll hire a CRO person, and having one person dedicated to experimentation means that we'll be running tens of thousands of experiments without proper staffing, without leadership, without anything else. They'll like get one person or a super small group of folks and not empower them to actually make decisions or hold them accountable. And then that's a challenge of this, kind of a lone wolf person to evangelize and establish this experimentation program. So I think at a certain point, you might be ultimately doomed to fail if you don't have that leadership buy-in. Well, let's assume that you are that one person kind of coming into an experimentation program while also having that leadership buy-in. What are the things you want to start prioritizing or doing tactically or even strategically for a lone wolf type of person, where you're the one person doing experimentation? What are things you should do to start building out your program?
One of the best things that you can do is to get leadership involved in experimentation. And there are various ways of doing it. You can bet money with them, right? Get some money out of your wallet, right? Okay, it's good. Put some money on the line.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, run sprints with them, right? Okay. So take a set of experiment sprints and say, we'd like to run some sprints with you, right? So you can help us, like with the test ideation and everything else, right? You've got experience in business here. Let's bring you along to the meetings. We'll involve you in the process. Maybe one of your ideas will even get in there as a test. I would even try and make that happen, right?
Yeah.
I would want to see one of their ideas that they feel really invested in tested. Okay. Even something random they come up with, will say, yeah, let's test that then, even if it's not the most amazing suggestion, get a test of theirs into that sprint, right? And the first time I did this with my team, what was happening was we were a small team of people. It's kind of me as a lone wolf and some support staff kind of carved out of another department. So I didn't even have full-time staff, right? And we would do all the research. We would build the tests, after, forming a solid hypothesis. We would do all the pre-test power calculations. We'd have done a lot of work to get to this point, right? And there would be a creative ready and built. And this creative was built on all that insight, right? Going back, right? And then what would happen is somebody in management would look at the test and would change stuff on it, right? It would say, oh, I don't really like this wording. It's not on brand. Or, hey, I think we should have the button over here, right? Or, and they would have no idea of the history of the tests and stuff. And it was getting really infuriating for us because they were like, you're messing with my stuff, man. You know? And like, so I said to the team, no, we're going to get them involved, right? So we brought them into the experiment sprints. Like, you think a green triangular button is going to do well? Let's put that in the test then, right? Okay. And do you know what? They got proved wrong, and it was great, right? But they also understood we had a process, right? And what they were doing was actually breaking that process, right? Because they were interfering at the last minute, even though we had based this on tons of stuff, right? And they could see that now that they were involved with it, right? But it also taught them, especially betting money with them on test results, it taught them that they can't predict the future, right? You know, after about 3 months with one CEO of doing bets with him, we won money, a lot of money, right? And he got quite cross about it and said, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this anymore, Sullivan, right? He said, I'm losing too much money. And I said, you know, I said, but I'm keeping track of the guess rates, right? And our guess rate is about 58%, right? Or something like that. So it's terrible, right? We don't know either. It's just your guess rate is even worse than ours, right? Because we know a little bit about the research that went into the tests, right? So we probably have a little edge on you, but neither of us are much better than just flipping a coin, right? So the answer is you don't know, I don't know, my team don't know, nobody knows how this experiment is going to go, right? And that's the lesson that's the lesson I wanted him to learn, right? By losing the money, the pain taught him the lesson, right? You have no idea what the outcome is going to be. That's why we test it.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, you're basically saying like it's almost a win-win, right? Like if their idea loses, you make the money on the side, you can go out to dinner. But if it wins, then you're empowering that leader to be excited about experimentation. That's basically what you've disseminated. You tactically gave some ideas, but your whole concept is get leadership excited about experimentation.
Yes,
whether it's
get them involved. Yeah, a bit of gamification as well. But whilst you have them there, right, say to them, what are the biggest problems you're facing? What are you most worried about in terms of your quarterly targets that you have to meet, right? How do you think you're going to try and solve those kind of problems, right? Right. So we talk about UX research techniques, CRO techniques, but we always seem to talk about them in the context of the customers of a website, right? But we forget that we should also use these discovery techniques on our colleagues and the people we're working with, right? Okay. So what about using these for leadership or those that we need to influence? So find out their jobs to be done, their targets, their problems, the things that keep them awake at night, right? Because not only will they tell you about those problems expressed in management language, you can then respond in management language by using experimentation as a way of framing how to go about solving that problem, right? You then become a solution, right? Not just some guys who are running tests on stuff, right? And then that also teaches leadership, that person that you're talking to, that you're actually trying to solve a real business problem using experimentation rather than just jiggling stuff around on the website, right? Pixel pushing, right?
Sorry, I was going to say, look, your client, your customers are your client because you're trying to improve their UX. But to me, it's so powerful to frame it also that your leadership is your client too, because you need their help to grow your program. So they're just as much a customer as their actual customers. That's fantastic. I love that.
But also they need education as well. And a lot of them won't admit it. Experimentation at practitioner level is in scarce supply in a lot of companies, right? Imagine how scarce experimentation skills are at the sea level, right? They're needed a lot more. Demand is far greater than supply there at the moment. There's definitely a reason for that. So if you can help educate them, right? I've seen people who have built, like, they've done little videos, right? Bite-sized videos. Let's explain certain aspect of statistics or A/B testing or how it works. Let's do it in a 5-minute video, right? And then send it to everybody, right? Get them to watch it, And if you actually do that upwards education, right, what you're doing is infusing experimentation thinking into the management layer, right? And they won't admit to you, right? They won't come to you and say, I really don't understand statistics, right? And you say, hell yeah, who does? And then you all laugh, right? But the whole point is that they are also an internal customer for education too, and a very important one, right? So sending them articles, right? Do you know what I like doing? I like finding articles about what other companies are doing with experimentation in their market area, and I send them stuff to make them scared, right? And it's very Machiavellian, right? But it's absolutely true, It works.
I mean, it's the same thing as like people who see competitors doing stuff, like tactically speaking about experimentation. If someone else is doing something really cool, then your leadership might be like, oh, look at this new functionality. Like, let's add it, let's test it, blah, blah, blah. It's the same thing about talking about how badass other experimentation programs are being run, to then kind of almost say, well, competitor has this experimentation program and look at all the stuff that they're doing. Why not us?
Well, I actually ask the leadership of companies to talk to their peers who are working in non-compete companies, right? That they know within their LinkedIn network about what they're doing with experimentation, right? Some companies have a very insular view of how well their stuff is doing. And there's one way of putting that to the test is benchmarking yourself against other companies, is to go and talk to them about the practice, right? Some of them will tell you BS about what they're doing. Some of them will tell you the truth, but you'll certainly figure out a lot more about what's going on within other companies and get a better idea of where you are sort of in the whole maturity curve or cycle, right? I think that's pretty important. But I think if you're a lone wolf, whether you're a freelancer or whether you're internal, there's a lot of internal and external PR that you have to run, right? You have to hustle, right? You have to be Donkey from Shrek, right? Highly visible, really annoying, in the middle of everything that's going on, right? Okay, be Donkey from Shrek, right?
Oh my God.
So you run a test that disproves an assumption that people have had for 5 years. You send it round to everyone. You rub their faces in it, right? You make it hurt, right? Because that's when people begin to learn. You don't know, right? And sometimes you have to go through this pain to get out the other side, which is the world doesn't care what you hope wins, right? The experiment will go the way it goes, right?
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so last question for you. One of the things that you mentioned early on is you've been running experimentation programs and or consulting on them for effectively 20 years at this point, minus a couple of years, 18. You said you made a lot of mistakes along the way, and it's almost like you've run an experiment on experimentation programs to get better at them. Specifically around that, what is, in a few couple sentences, like what was your biggest failure that you've learned from as like, don't do this, guys. Red flags, don't do this. This isn't worth it.
Making assumptions about how much knowledge I actually had. That was by far the biggest mistake that I made. And making assumptions about my ability to predict what will happen when you make a change and put it in front of millions of people, right? And it's a humbling thing, right? It involves, when I first started usability testing, I thought, I can design good stuff. It's going to work well in the test. And it would go in there and people would destroy it, right? It would be terrible. They couldn't use it, right? And it was soul destroying for me at first. But then I realized, no, this is good, right? They're telling me what's wrong. I can fix it and come back. And I did again and again. So my mentor took me through 2 years of doing this every week, at least once or twice, right? For a whole group of people. And it beat all that stuff out of me. All that, I think I know what I'm doing. My design is going to smash it. It's absolutely great. I invested in this personally in my ego, right? And all of that got destroyed, right?
Yeah.
But then I thought, hey, I'm pretty good now, right? I've watched a lot of these usability tests, right? I ought to be able to guess if I put something into a usability into an A/B test that I think is like a customer experience, a user experience improvement, it ought to win, right?
Yeah.
18 months later, I was like in a trough again. I was like pulling my hair out, like, I don't know anything, right? I can't predict the results of this stuff at all, right? I thought I was good at this, right? And the problem was because my ego was this big and my knowledge was actually that big, right? Okay, right. These days, right, my ego is that big and my knowledge just about the same size, right? And that is the most important thing I learned and the mistake that I made, right? So my students ask me, what's the most important thing that you have learned in all that time? And I say to them, to understand the precise extent and boundary of my knowledge, to know what I know and to know what I sort of know and to know what I definitely don't know, right? Because once you know that, you know who to ask, right? Whether to do it yourself, whether to ask someone else, or whether to learn about it and fill in that gap in your knowledge, right? You know, it might be a wavy line. It's sort of good in that area, not so good in that area. But once you know that edge and outline of your knowledge, right, then you won't make those kind of ego-driven, biased mistakes I used to make with testing, right?
Yeah.
So I would do things like, I would stop tests like, the test is looking good today. I'll just stop it now and declare the results, right? You know, now I realize it's so stupid, right?
Yeah.
And I was just trying to make it a winner, right? And prove a point. I wanted my test to win, and I was prepared to do almost anything to make sure that that happened. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so
I
funny.
think like to reframe that, it's almost just like we don't know. And it's like it's almost taking accountability off of you to say, I don't know. Let's test it. Because you don't have to have the right answer.
Oh.
You have an answer to try. And
Do
if
you know
it
what?
loses, we'll try
It's,
this again.
it's liberating, actually. And that is
Yeah.
the freedom I feel now. I no longer feel that it doesn't matter which way it goes, right? You know,
Totally.
the chips are going to fall away, the chips are going to fall, and then there's another branching, and you realize it's like watching this dendritic branching, right? It's almost like thinking about, well, if I have coffee or tea in the morning, well, that's two branches, right? But then if I have an oatmeal muffin or a banana muffin, well, that's like it's now. And once all of those possible choices spread out into the future, there's just too many to even fit into your brain. Right. And that's what we're facing with experimentation. What we're trying to do is cut out bits of that dendritic future that's not worth going down, right? It's like pruning out pathways, right? If you're in the middle of a swamp, right, you don't want to paddle down all the bits of the swamp to get out of it. You just want to paddle out the most promising route that's going to get you out of it quickest, right? You know?
Yeah.
So experimentation becomes a kind of compass. It helps steer you, right? It helps keep you away from bad and harmful places and keeps you towards the areas of good and solid and, you know, sustainable growth, you know. Lucas calls this pruning the tree. That's why you prune a tree. You cut out the bad bits, you know, you try and improve the shape and the health of the tree, right? You know, and it's something that you do continually, right? But it means that the tree grows stronger and better as a result of it, right? You're just pruning all those stupid decisions out of your future before you make them, right?
Let me circle back. You mentioned it's about the swamp. And then let's just summarize. Just be like Donkey. Be annoying, but be excited. And make sure you're maybe, Donkey doesn't know everything, but he's still trying to figure it out, and it's okay. He's trying a lot of things, and eventually he figures it out, because maybe Donkey's not writing a lot of tests. Maybe not the best example, but that personality trait is so important. Craig, thank you so much for jumping on this. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I definitely have to have you back for another show, because I think we only covered like 1.5 topics of what I actually wanted to cover. But this was fantastic. Definitely going to have you on for the rest of this. Craig, thank you so much for your time.
We'll do the rest. It was a pleasure. Thank you, Shiva. Have a great
Thanks.
day.